What's up, my Yugi Bros? I'm your host, the RJB0. Welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! In Business Casual. So I'm sure y'all have realized recently that the hands are everywhere, and even more ubiquitous than the hands themselves are the people complaining about the hands. And I'm actually about to shock the world right now by saying that I don't have an issue with the hands. I'm absolutely fine with them. In fact, I would go so far as to say that I would not be disappointed if the hands did not get hit on the next ban list. I know this is an insanely radical thing for me to say, and that's because there are these two main opinions about the hands going around right now, which are that they are degenerate to the game state, and that they reduce the skill of deck building. And I'm actually going to debunk both of those ideas through one concept, and that concept is the fact that if you take the hands off this huge demonic pedestal that we've put them on, and you look at them more as a replacement for traditional back row cards that we no longer have in the game, you realize that they are not actually that game-breaking of cards. They are really good, don't get me wrong, they are actually spectacular cards, but they really don't change the game state a spectacular amount. Let's start with that complaint about them reducing the skill of deck building. Now, people say that they reduce the skill of deck building because if you have some slots that you don't really want to fill up, you can just put the hands in there and you're absolutely a-okay. And they also say that because there are decks that previously were considered to be bad that are topping now because they put the hands in them, and the hands make them competitive because they carry the game. Now, both of these things, in my opinion, are wrong based on the idea of hands taking the place of traditional back row. Now, the purpose of these traditional defensive back row cards is a very similar purpose to the hands in most decks, especially very slow control-based decks, which is that the purpose is to remove cards from the field and to protect your own field presence. You did this back in the day when we had Solemn Judgment Legal, when we had multiple torrential, multiple bottomless, multiple compulsory evac device. This is actually really interesting because you don't see the hands that much in the OCG, and that's because they already have 3 torrentials. They have that kind of open back row kind of format that we do not have in the game right now. So that's kind of evidence that the hands are taking the place of the traditional back row. So these slots that people use for the hands, these 4 slots, used to be used with their triple MST and the Trap Trio, which if somebody ever makes a Yu-Gi-Oh! Band and doesn't name it that, I'm going to be incredibly disappointed. So, and this also goes toward this argument that decks that aren't good are topping because of the hands. And if you look at these decks that supposedly aren't good, that are topping with the hands, these are actually decks that were topping with a fair amount of consistency back when Solemn was at 1, when you had your double torrential and double bottomless. These are decks that do really well in a slow back row heavy format, and they are coming out of the woodwork now because they have cards to replace those old traditional pieces of defensive back row, and those cards are the hands. And then there is the argument out there, and this goes more toward the idea of them being degenerate to the game state, that they can clear the field and so they're bad for the game. And I think that's kind of silly because we have tons of cards in the game right now that are easy access for most decks that clear the board. For instance, Evil Storm Exciton Knight, Black Rose, Malcat, Dark Hole. To be fair, these cards do destroy your own cards, but they also have that unique ability to hold field presence, except Black Rose and I suppose Dark Hole, since they take away your field presence, but in general, with Dark Hole you use progressively, and you have field presence after you use the Dark Hole, so it really isn't that unique to have a card which can clear your opponent's board, and then leave field presence out for you to use. So I think that argument for them being degenerate is not such a hot argument in the first place. Now, the reason why I think that people are thinking that the cards are degenerate is because they're actually used in decks in which back row, as we traditionally use it, wouldn't be used. For instance, Girgia and Madolches, well, Girgia to some degree, but not necessarily as much. Madolches are using these cards in a different way than we would use the hands in, say, a Worm deck or a Fire Fist deck, or even in a Hat, or something like that. Madolches use it as a way of baiting out back row, of getting rid of back row. Now, to some degree, they do that in all the other decks, but the reason why Madolches do it is different from other decks. Now, in Hat, if you use a hand to get rid of a piece of back row, or to get rid of a monster, you're using it to get that +1. You are using it as an engine to gain yourself advantage, and that's the kind of advantage that an opponent can come back from. If you destroy my monster, and I'm playing, wow, I'm just bad at coming up with examples, but if I'm playing a control-based deck, and all you do is, during your turn, you destroy a monster, or a monster and a spell or trap card, or something like that with a hand, and that's all you do, then I can come back from that. It's the same with if you just summon a Moral Talk and pop one of my monsters. It's the same if you use Murmelio to search out a back row, because those are singular pieces of advantage that your opponent are gaining at one time. But when you're playing them in Madolches, they bait out that back row, they get rid of that back row, and they get rid of those problem monsters to open up explosive plays that are extremely difficult to A, stop, and B, to come back from, and the hands make them even more difficult to stop, to the point where you have to be running cards that aren't necessarily even that good this format, like Valor, in order for you to stop those plays. So I think that's actually the reason why hands are considered to be degenerate in this format, is because there are these decks that make explosive plays and use the hands to bait out the cards that you would normally have to use to stop those explosive plays. So I think that the answer is not to hit the hands, because if you take away these decks, if you hit these other decks, the hands won't really be that big to the game. Like they aren't really in the OCG. So I think that the answer is to hit Madolches, to hit Girya, to some degree to hit Mermails, but they don't use the hands as much. They use them in the side deck. Dragons, I'm kind of okay with them using the hands in, because dragons are extremely inconsistent now anyway. Also, I kind of have a bias in favor of dragon rulers. So, but that's just kind of my opinion on the cards. I just thought I'd talk about it since a post came up about it yesterday on Facebook, which you should definitely join the group down below. Anyway, I know that there are some counter arguments out there, and I do want to hear them, so talk about it in the comment section down below. Meanwhile, I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why in the comment section below. And of course, subscribe for more decks, discussion, analysis, and general Yu-Gi-Oh! Shenanigans. Meanwhile, thank you guys for watching Yu-Gi-Oh! and Business Casual. I'm your host, the RJB0, and I got a jet. See you guys.